On today's video, we're going to take a look at Rapid Composer and how it can create beautiful string runs, beautiful ostinatos for strings or woodwinds, and endless varieties of those ostinatos and runs. And it's really quite easy to do. And we're going to pick up kind of where we left off yesterday. We've added in the Orchestra Complete 2 with its staccato preset here, full string staccato. And that's what's going to play this ostinato generator that we're going to drag in here. And we have that set up to be, instead of the general user MIDI yesterday, we've set it to our plugin host, and that will be playing channel 1. So that means that this now is going to be the sounds that we're hearing, not internal sounds of Rapid Composer. And also, if we go to this channel here, which is right up here, we can see for the input, it is indeed Rapid Composer MIDI channel 1. And that's what we want. So next, we're going to drag in the ostinato generator, not one of the pre-made patches down here, but a live generator that we can morph and change in so many ways. All right, let's do just that. Let's grab this ostinato generator, and we can already see the pattern we're getting here. If you don't like that, you can click on it a few more times and you'll see the pattern change. But it's a basic pattern, so at this point it really doesn't matter. Let's drag it in to the cube over here, release, and we have our first pattern, and we can play it now using the Orchestra Complete full staccato. So immediately we have a very usable and interesting little ostinato pattern. And it really is, I mean, it fit into our chord progression very nicely. Remember, these notes are just straight patterns when you start with them, but when you drag them in, they start to take the shape of whatever your composition rules are. And my composition rules are C major, like yesterday. Today it's 95 beats per minute, a little bit slower, and our chords are the same, and so it's taken the shape and the speed of my rules here. So really, you know, you could have any chords, any beats per minute, and any chord or scale, or I should say any note and scale to use with that. So it's just a great way to drag these patterns in, let them morph to whatever you have set up, and just keep adding and changing to that. So let's now make some changes. We select it, and we go up here, and we begin to see all these options. And indeed, there are a lot of options, and we're going to kind of real-time make changes to this pattern. So I think a good place to start is with the generator tab itself, because this is a generator we're using, so it has a dedicated generator tab up here with all kinds of goodness that can be changed. So right now our pattern is reflected down here, and it's also inside our composition. We have auto apply turned on, which means every time I make a change with a slider or anything, it's going to be automatically updated here. First thing to notice, we have a bunch of sliders which change the pattern, and we have a bunch of pattern defaults that start at a default place, and then you move the sliders to influence that. So let's get to basics of how this works by turning all these sliders all the way to the left. And you see the pattern gets a lot more simple, and that's a good place to start for you to understand what these sliders do and the basic pattern shape that it begins with. Let's go to the first one, and we see that it's a very basic shape. It's updated live here. Let's play this. So yeah, it's exactly what we expect. A pattern that has been simplified. It's less chaotic, or it has less dynamics, but it's the root pattern here, and now we can see how these sliders work going forward. A good place to start is with this slider right here, insert chord root notes. And when I turn this on, you'll see a bunch of bass notes start to populate. Now it's going to start with a lot and then get less and less, so you can control that here. So I slide, and you can see those bass notes start to expand and contract. And you can set really quickly. Instead of having to go into your DAW and write these notes, so you would probably write a couple notes, copy it, and then paste it, then paste it, and then paste it out. But here it's just have a slider, and you can change it so quickly, and you can add so many notes that adhere to your chord pattern. This slider alone is, you know, if you do this in your DAW, there are ways to make it quicker, like I said, by copying, pasting, and having little macros that will help you with that. But why do that when you can have it just done live and just morph and just instantly have it adhere to your rules? So this alone is a really nice, fast little slider that gives you bass notes. And so it makes this pattern more dynamic for your string player to play. And it just adds a lot more depth to it. So let's listen. And so I'm going to let it play, and I'm going to change how many bass notes so that you can see that this one slider alone really changes things. So we want to have some of those bass notes down there because they're adding dynamics and giving us that bass register. Let's leave that on. So now let's continue to make this more interesting. We can start with the pattern, this quarter pattern length above it here. And that's a good place to start on the next slider. Add in a little bit of this, and you can see how it changes. So we're going to just add in a little bit on that slider, and we can just listen. So it's just rearranged it a little bit, but here's the interesting bit down here now with this slider, as this is going to add a little bit of that dynamic range, and I wouldn't say chaos because the notes added will fit in nicely to our chord progression. They're going to be following musical rules, but it's going to add new interesting notes above this obvious pattern. So you can see those blue notes start to shift and move. I just added a few. And you can see now here and here, we're getting the odd note that is going to still be musical to our ears, but it's going to say to the listener, oh, there's unexpected things happening here, which make it more interesting. Let's listen. And especially right there with that little extra unexpected high note there. Let's add even more. Very good. I'm really getting some nice results where I started with a nice pattern. I have unexpected happy things going on with extra notes. I've got the bass notes going on down here. Next, what I want to do is I want more dynamic velocity changes. So to do that, we're going to go to the Variations tab, and we're going to add a variation that will give us a very nice way to change the velocity very quickly. Now we have a bunch of sliders, and as I change these, you will see the notes not move, but you'll see the colors of these notes change from white and light blue to more darker blues as I add in more velocity to them. But we're keeping it very dynamic. So now we have more velocity and a lot of changes in velocity according to some of these sliders, and this is something you can spend some time looking at and researching. But really what it's doing really quickly is adding different velocities to each note, which means our violin player or our strings player is playing more dynamic as far as how hard he's pressing on the bow, and we're getting that benefit in a more dynamic sounding pattern. And there's too much change there, so we're going to make these a little bit more steady. so that we don't get too much change. And there's a couple notes we may want to make them a little more blue. I think that's the one we're looking at. So we still have some dynamic range in here in velocities, but it's not so drastic that it's going to affect it in a bad way. Let's listen. So we kind of very quickly added velocity changes using this method here. But there are many other methods you could use. And we could use the velocity generator, which uses different tools to vary the velocity quickly, and a basic velocity setting. But if you want to get back to more traditional ways of showing velocity and editing, it has all those capabilities also. So if we wanted to make those traditional changes, we would go to this button up here, and we would change that to note editing, because really that's what we're doing. We click that, and now we have a complete interface that will show us that originally all of our velocities were very straight and steady. And in this way, we could change these with traditional tools, a line tool. So if we go to the line tool, you can draw out slopes so that, say, if you had a beginning of a song, you could drag it out and say you wanted to ramp up to a certain point, maybe the bridge of the song or whatever, then you want it to drop off and then re-ramp up again. Or you could start it very strong and ramp down. Or you could use freehand where you're just kind of, if I click on that correctly, where you're just using your mouse and giving it randomization that way. And you have a bunch of other tools, curve tools, all the tools you would expect in a nice package where you can get a lot of different effects. But let's go back and kind of just line tool, set this to an average right across the board, something like that. And let's go back to how we were doing it in the actual program. So make sure to get out of here again, go back to the phrase, and now click on it, and it will again take the velocities from here instead. So you have multiple ways to change the dynamics of your string runs and ostinatos as far as velocity is concerned. All right, now let's look at something else. I have my velocity changes. I've edited the main generator to give me bass notes and some random musical notes to make it more pleasing and unexpected. Now I want to quickly generate a harmony. I want some chord notes to go with this pattern, and I want it to all fall into the rules I have set up here with the C major and these chords. I would go to the Harmonize button, and I would make sure Harmony track is selected. I would click the button, the magic Auto Harmonize button, and presto, we have harmony here. We have chord notes that should harmonize nicely with the above track. Now, this should be set to something that will, by default, it will be set to the track. So if we go here, if we go to General, we'll see that by default is set to our sound font piano, and we can listen to that, or we can change it to use a string library like the orchestra, but we'll set that to sustain notes. But let's listen to it with the default piano sound fonts and just see what it generated automatically. So that's a good starting point. It's given us chords that are relevant to our notes up here, but we can do a lot more with that. Since we can, and this is all about strings today, let's switch this from the piano to the orchestra, but with a different articulation. Quick way to do that would be to take this track up here, right-click inside of Cubase, duplicate, and rename this to Orchestra Complete, but Harmony. And we open the instrument interface, and we set that from staccato, and we're using the colors, so we just go to full sustain up here. So now we have two articulations of the same library, and we can move this off to the side so we can still see our interface. And just make sure that this is set to MIDI plugin host, just like it is up here. And we go back to this track here and make sure the input is set to that same input, and it is. So really what we're going to get is the same notes, but what this is going to do is it's going to send these chord notes to a different articulation. So let's listen to the change. And just click off it here. So now we have nice sustained chord notes that are harmonized with whatever we want to change up here. And remember, this is still live, so we can change this on the fly, and these chords and harmonies should change on the fly with it. We're going to start to demonstrate some of those capabilities next. So we've rearranged things to give us very basic harmonies, and we can listen to this. And now we're going to start to mix it up using these sliders. So we have it based on rules, which means these rules can be different rule sets. What if we wanted, instead of major scale rules, what if we said, well, let's try it with Dorian. Let's just try that, auto harmonize. Let's see what we get. We get a whole different flavor. But we're getting very interesting things happening, but the jumps are too dramatic here in what's going on. So let's make some adjustments. Let's say that we can have inversions, and let's go minimize chord note distances. That should help us. And auto. And now we're going to get this same flavor of Dorian, but in a much more manageable fashion. And that's a lot more usable. And this is a very specific flavor we've got going here. Let's continue on with some different rules, and let's try the Aeolian minor scale set. And try that. So we're able to, with one click, get a whole bunch of different rules going very quickly. What if we wanted to try a pop major rule set? We could try that also. And we may want to, just change some of these settings to maybe start on the 5th. And that didn't seem to make a big change. Let's go with a perfect cadence. See? And it didn't show any changes visually. Let's see. Really liking this though, with the pop major, and really this is just I think if I was doing this, creating a song, I would save this idea. So I would probably go to this page here and say save composition at this point and save it. I'd probably name it as some a musical idea and give it a name that represents, this idea. And that's the joy of this program. You're changing things and you're coming up with different rules that affect your notes, and but you're using really great fundamentals to shape that. You're not just throwing out random dice and generating a bunch of junk. This is based on musical rules and ideas. So you're very much more likely to get something usable than not usable. At this point, you can just mess around and really start to change basic functions, which give you new rules to live by here, or stick where you're at. And we may want to just change this around and try some new ideas. Now that's too low for my liking. That might be helpful if we had a lot of low double bass and contra woodwinds and that type of idea. But really, for what we're doing here with kind of high to mid strings, let's just stick with that. And so now we're getting back to the higher kind of registers. I think at this point, I've kind of showed that, the harmony button is not just a random kind of button that produces just random stuff. It's based on musical ideas that will conform to what you have up here. And I find it really, on the tests I've done, really quite nice in how it works. Fast, automatic. So you definitely want to experiment with the Auto Harmonize tab and settings. Next, I want to take this upper phrase and continue to edit that and do some experiments with these actual ostinato notes. Let's go to the Variations tab. Let's add something in here. Let's say that we want to apply some rhythm. We could apply a melody, but we do have these notes that are giving us kind of melodic ideas that are off the beaten kind of rhythmic path here. So I think it'd be more interesting to apply a rhythm here. So what we can do is immediately we see a change if we turn that off and on. So we can see that it's gotten rid of some notes and given us more of an eighth note kind of feeling. Let's listen to that. I'm going to turn down the harmonic notes in the background, those chords, just so we can hear this, what we're working on, clearer. And we realize that now we have a new palette to work with. The notes have been simplified and rearranged here. We could, because the out of rhythm notes has been deleted, we can bring them back with this button when we want them. So we can make them sustain notes. And I like the extra length it's bringing to these notes, so I'm going to add sustain on there. But if you notice, the most interesting part of apply rhythm is this box up here, which can be driven by another generator. And that's what we're going to look at next. So there are a lot of things we could add in this Variations tab now. We have our velocity changes, but if we wanted to reconfigure that where the accents are on every one of these notes, we can add something called the accents up here. And what that will allow is to just change where the accents are on the pattern of notes. And immediately we get a different accent combination. you can hear the big difference. Now, as I was changing these, you could hear a huge difference. Now, the notes never changed in position once, but it is changing the accents of how these notes are heard. And this is a very interesting little variation that you can get a lot of different musical ideas out of this. So be sure to experiment with this. So we like this idea. Now we're going to add something else. One thing we could do next is add something like simplify, which is right here, and do a full simplify. So it's going to take some of these measures up here and simplify them, and give us some room for some possibly adding some, not accents, intervals. So now we've got a bunch of intervals. So zoom down here, and a third above. And we can mute. You see a bunch of new notes showed up here. We can listen to that. And we can turn the simplify off and hear all the notes. Too much, too busy, but we like the idea of being able to add an interval whenever we like. Let's mute the original notes with this button. Now it's not so overblown, so busy, and we can say how much polyphony of the new third idea we want. We could go crazy, but let's keep it very simple. We may just keep it at the basic and listen to that. So now we've got these intervals, a third above. We could go a second above. We could go something like down below a third. This will bring it down a little bit. Might give us an interesting idea. Let's turn it off and listen again. Let's switch it to seventh above. Transpose it down. And just for the sake of clarity, let's turn off the harmony now. And since we may want to re-roll the initial idea from the generator, let's do that. Let's re-roll that. Reconfigure. So now we have something different here with an interval. We can simplify that and see at the beginning how it sounds. Now, the reason you may want to do that is for a beginning. So you may want to retitle this and create a new part out of this and say intro. And that would give you a little bit of string action along with whatever harmonies you got or other tracks, and it might be an interesting way to lead into your next part of your song. Let's listen. And that still needs work. You'd want something more interesting down here, but that's the idea of maybe having that simplified. But for now, our use is limited there. Let's go back. We're going to mute that again. Now let's try something highly experimental. We're going to remove that. We're going to remove the interval, and we'll leave the accents and the velocity. We're going to add something, apply a melody. So what we have here, scroll down, is it's applied a little melody, a little idea to parts of this, and let's just listen to it. And we can go back to our normal 0 transpose. And maybe you want to go up a little bit. Now we're going to add something interesting. First of all, we can change some settings here, which doesn't seem to be affecting much because we need to move this up or down first. So you can see our melody notes that have been added. They're the ones moving now in the first measure. Now if I want these to stick out a little bit, I can have them at a higher range up here, and I can have remove the notes below it or above it. So since there are no notes above it, nothing gets deleted. But if I was to move them again below, we're going to see those notes disappear when I hit this button. So now this kind of little melody line has been revealed more, and it should give us an interesting intro to the rest of our pattern. And that's what we get. We get a new, interesting, non-cluttered intro into our pattern. Okay, so that's working well. But what if we tried something even a little bit crazier and took like a dyad run? What we have here, it's 2 notes instead of a triad, but it makes for a very interesting string runs. Let's take this and drag it into the processing field, the driver for the apply melody variation. Drop it. Now what's happened is taken over completely. We don't want that. We want to remove the notes higher than the melody. We can take the accent from there. Now what we have is something where we have our old pattern. It's been altered, but it has this interesting run going down. Now will this be musical and usable? Let's see. So the interesting part is it's added this run that goes down for the bass while the rest of the strings maintain. But we want to change that around a bit. We want to bring this up, and we want to kind of dissect it right through the middle of our little phrase here. Now we have the dyad run, which is a single note run now, but it's going right through our pattern. Let's see what that sounds like. That's an interesting experimental little way of looking at this pattern now. It's really done something pretty wild. I like the first 2. If we were to just loop the first 2, I think we got something really interesting that could be used. And then we may want to then do a dyad that's in a different run going up. Instead of up to down, it might go down to up. So you have a lot of options here of how you can get experimental, not just do maybe obvious changes to your pattern with adding intervals and changing the transpose and rearranging the notes and the velocities. But you can do some really experimental things in this program. Now what I want to do is turn back on the harmony, but we're going to use the instrument that's playing the harmony. We're going to change that instrument to a full pizzicato, a more light and airy way to hear this harmony content here, harmonic content, against these notes up here. And we still have our looper on, and we're just going to listen to that and see what we came up with in this little demo. And so that's kind of a nice result, which I would save as an idea again and use or put in my library down here, because really whatever you create up here can be saved as a generator preset or as a overall composition. So you could save it as a full composition, or you can click on this and save it out as a generated idea. But since we have extra layers and harmony, I would prefer to save it as a full composition as a musical idea. Now, next, to close off today's little program, I'm going to show the harmony generated to produce really kind of cool ideas from the orchestra that use the full animated orchestra. So it's going to show the presets of the animated orchestra with a harmony track and how that just works really nice. So to end today's program, I'm going to just show some simple setup here where I have one orchestra complete set to animated presets, and we're going to go through different ones here. And really that's being driven by both this channel, which is an edited ostinato generator. So this is kind of demonstrating what I've taught in the first part of the video, where you can drag out an ostinato generator, edit that, give you a little melody line or pattern, and then come up with an instant harmony to go with that on the second track. Now, in the case of driving the Orchestra Complete animated orchestra, it just works beautifully. So as a small idea, this harmony track just drives this really, I think, in a great way, and it applies to many of the different presets here. Let's start listening. First one's called Warrior's Path. And without the harmony, with the harmony track to fill it out and really make it work. All right, let's just zoom. Let's go right to the very first one because it really works nicely on almost all of these animated orchestra presets. Let's scoot up to the beginning. Moment of decision. Let's listen. So a very quiet and softer preset this time, but the harmony track just brings it together and drives it nicely. Let's go to the next one, Point of No Return, and listen. Now, just to show the variations again, I think it's worthwhile to select this and right-click and go to the Harmony tab and just make some changes on the fly. So let's say that we want it to go with imperfect to any on the cadence and to start on the 1, and you know, we could add just a strong beat there to maybe give us another chord. Let's try that and move this to the side so we have now a few new chords and a more interesting harmony setup. And let's see if that is musical. Let's go down to the first and start. Isn't that amazing? Really, what's happening here is we're taking just the default preset, which are really nice inside of the orchestra, but we've got it playing this little melodic line up here to help. Now, you got to know that in the orchestra, if we go to the main tab, it's using arpeggiation to make the strings move itself inside this program. But it's being led by these notes, which are nice and musical according to these chords, which we can change on the fly here. But also, it's also being greatly enhanced by matching beautiful chord notes as a harmonic idea to drive the belly of this preset. And together, it just really sounds great. And it sounds great almost on any one I'm trying here. So let's go to the March of the Skeletons and let's listen to that. So another great result. And let's just go and continue here a little bit. Now that's kind of an unusual preset. Let's try the next one. I mean, that really takes this preset and, in my opinion, takes it to the next level with the harmonies and this little pattern to drive it. I mean, it alone, if you listen, by itself, it's a beautiful sounding preset, but when you bring it into this context of having it driven by these rules, it in my opinion, really just makes it beautiful. And I wanted to show this because I just by accident was, you know, experimenting with all this. And I just noticed that adding the harmony track and having, you know, a generator up here just really made these presets that I know well from the past, but took them to that next level. Let's just click on the next one. Let's go not a 6/8, but let's keep these to 4/4 signatures. So let's go to the next one. Another beautiful result. Let's go to the swampland. And beautiful if you want to go something slower and kind of majestic. Next one. Now, this preset is, you know, very, you know, sharp and abrupt. So let's just click above. Let's go to the next one, Garden of Life. That's very nice, kind of mystical again. Let's go to the next one. Another really beautiful result with this particular settings up here. Hope you enjoyed this video and got to see a little bit of how you can use a tool like RapidComposer to really maybe extend your usual string ostinato notes and ideas with some experimental new ideas. And, you know, it really, for me, allows me to take the usual ostinatos, which by default are quite nice in this program and varied, but really add experimental features, I think is what it comes down to. And hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you're safe wherever you're at in the world today. And we shall see you on the next video.